Hello and welcome to An Old Man Watches, and today I'll be talking about the 1960 historical epic Spartacus. And the film is set in the 1st century BCE. The Roman Republic has slid into corruption, its menial work done by armies of slaves. One of these slaves, a proud and actually quite gifted Thracian named Spartacus, is so uncooperative to his masters in a mining pit that he is sentenced to death by starvation. However, he is saved by chance when he is displayed to ambitious Roman businessman Lentulus Batiatus, who, impressed with his ferocity, purchases Spartacus for his gladiatorial school. Batiatus does not know what he has unleashed. Spartacus is just as independently minded as a gladiator as he was as a mining slave, only now he's trained in combat and has access to arms and armour. The Thracian ultimately sparks a revolt at the school, where the gladiators slaughter their guards and escape into the wilderness, electing Spartacus to be their general. Despite his lack of formal education, Spartacus proves an able commander. His ragtag army defeats several Roman forces, growing in both prestige and numbers as a result, with other unhappy slaves, and there are no happy slaves, flocking to his banner. But as the Republic finally begins to take the threat of the slave army seriously and calls in its best troops and commanders to face them, the odds against the gladiator and his followers grow ever longer. So, that's a précis of Spartacus. Now, perhaps it makes me a film Philistine or a filmistine, but I'm not actually a fan, on the whole, of Stanley Kubrick, who directed this film. It's true his films are gorgeously shot, but there's more to being a great director than a keen eye for visual composition. And interestingly, Spartacus is a film Kubrick himself tried to kind of distance himself from, and at times refused to consider part of his own canon, because he didn't have complete control of the production like he did with all of his other projects. Perhaps that's why I like this movie better than I do most of his other stuff. But let's dig into the film a little more. So one of the things that's, I think, important to think about in the context of this movie is the then contemporary, or 1950s, politics. And I'll need to go and give you some explanation about that. So to me, Kubrick's negative attitude towards this film is ironic, given not only that it established his career as a big picture director, but also because he was reportedly quite eager to claim the screenwriting credit for it. He didn't write the script. The script, which was adapted from a novel by Howard Fast, was actually written by a man named Dalton Trumbo. Now, Trumbo was a communist who was blacklisted by Hollywood after he refused to give evidence against other possible socialists in the film industry. So technically, he shouldn't be writing films, and he should not be credited. That would be breaking the blacklist. And so a discussion was had about, because he did write the script, who do we credit? And Kubrick was apparently quite enthusiastic to take the credit. Kirk Douglas was not on board with this idea, and he instead actually insisted that Trumbo get the credit in his own name and that they acknowledge who had written the screenplay. It was a move that prompted anti-communist picket lines at some of the cinemas where the film was showing, and a protest movement that actually collapsed only when the newly elected John F. Kennedy crossed one such picket line to see the film. Ironically, it would ultimately emerge that Trumbo, during his blacklist period, had actually won an Oscar, writing under a pseudonym of Richard Rich. And I think it's worthwhile having that context, about Trumbo's politics and the 11 months he spent in jail for refusing to name names and the 13 years he spent having to ply his trade in secret while you're watching this movie. The film's most famous scene, "I'm Spartacus," has a strong resonance when you consider that Trumbo was blacklisted for refusing to name names. You might even be tempted to draw parallels between the whole concept of a slave rebellion and that of a workers' revolution, and you probably should. Like Trumbo, the author of the original novel on which this was based was a communist, and he wrote Spartacus while in jail. His crime was refusing to name the contributors to a fund he had established in order to raise money for the orphans of American veterans of the Spanish Civil War. Gives you an idea about just how crazy the anti-socialist witch hunt in the 1950s really was. We have our own crazy witch hunts in the modern era. Hopefully we don't go quite as crazy as they did back then. Okay, second thing I want to talk about in relation to the film is the size of it. Spartacus was a huge project. It had a budget of $12 million in 1960, equivalent to about $118 million in 2022, and the cast was over 10,000 people. The reason for that is the battle scenes, which were filmed in Spain, and in which some 8,000 Spanish soldiers appear in Roman costumes for the movie's climactic confrontation. Now, there have been even bigger productions than this. The Italo-Soviet film Waterloo had over twice as many extras in its battle scenes, a whopping 15,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry. But even with 8,000 people, the sheer volume of men on the screen gives the battle sequences in Spartacus a scale and a scope that thus far I simply haven't seen captured by hordes of CGI figures, no matter how meticulously animated. And it's also a film of scale and scope in its runtime. It tops the 3-hour mark by more than 15 minutes. And yet it doesn't feel overly drawn out at that length. It manages to find the right balance of grandeur and pacing to sustain itself throughout. And I think, given the subject matter at hand, the life and struggle of a slave who managed to shake the most powerful nation in the world, that this sense of grandeur and this commitment to scale and scope is absolutely vital to the film's success. It's certainly not the only way to film Spartacus' story. One day I'm going to do a video about the Star TV series, which takes a very different tack. But it is definitely the right way to film this version of the story. So I think it's a smart play. Finally, the film has a really strong cast, and they all deliver. It's probably not surprising that Kirk Douglas plays the title role with stoic strength and dignity. This was something of a personal project for him. He was the one who, in fact, optioned the novel, but paying for it from his own personal finances. That involvement probably also explains the off-camera influence he was able to wield over the production. Not just the demand for Trumbo to be credited as the screenwriter, but also the hiring of Kubrick himself after Douglas fired the original director a single week into the shooting schedule. But Douglas is far from alone in delivering a good performance. Laurence Olivier is very good as the proud and ambitious Marcus Crassus, who would go on to rule Rome in a three-way alliance with Pompey and Caesar. But best of all, though, is probably Peter Ustinov as Batiatus, the obsequious but sly and ambitious owner of the gladiatorial school where Spartacus gets his training. Ustinov won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for his performance here, and I think he thoroughly deserved it. Ultimately, Spartacus is a film that succeeds in most of its ambitions and stands up nearly as well today as it did when it was made over 60 years ago. Next time, another iconic film with a 60s date stamp, 1969's Easy Rider. Will I be as positive about this movie as I was about Spartacus? No, I will not. But that's next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it.